What oh chaps, I'm MagicalMike and I'd like to talk some more about the September feature pack and the new player experience, and this is going to be a long video, so strap in, sit tight, we've got a lot to talk about, and please try and listen to me and try and understand that these are my opinions, and that you can have your own opinions, and that these opinions were also formed during a time when they were still changing things, so the experience is subject to change. Obviously in my last video I focused on a lot of first impressions and didn't really analyse anything at all. I just sort of did a whole knee-jerk reaction thing and that was that. And I also didn't talk about anything besides the new player experience. So in this video I'd like to also go into a lot more detail on all this stuff and really tell you what I think about it all. And first up are those things that I skipped out on, those changes being collections, mini-pets, the new trading post, the World v World season and the new levelling items. Firstly, I have to say that I love the new trading post, and after it got over all the initial hiccups, it has much improved. For me it is a much smoother system and it all works much better than before, although the error attempting to sell message is still a bit too quick to come down on me and just about everybody else. I'm not a bot, these other people probably aren't bots, I just have a lot of junk to sell, and that message is a little bit too intrusive. And speaking of junk, the collection system had very little impact at all for me, which I thought before the update. The game is already about collecting a lot of junk and skins and all that stuff, so all they really added with these achievements are a couple more rewards. And don't get me wrong, rewards are nice, but getting exotic isn't really that great for collecting all the Ascended Armour skins in my opinion. Also, some of the collections are still bugged over a month and a half afterwards, which I find completely ridiculous. Collections requiring Karma stuff in blue and green versions, both sold by the same vendor, also feel pretty filler to me. I also find a lot of them too dependent on RNG or gold, and in my opinion we need a lot less RNG/money requirements and more completion requirements. Make players play the game, not farm or pay money or gold. And nobody wants to farm that one ogre event over and over and over again just to get that one RNG item to unlock the collection that they may have already finished before getting this thing. It's just not fun. The dungeon collections are a good example of how they should be done though. Just get everything through tokens or PvP rewards and you get unique ascended stuff from it as a reward. Perfect. Having mini pets always active is a great thing, and there's really nothing more to say about that. I just like having access to all of my minis all of the time now, so that's a nice change. The World v World season has had very little for me to do. If the goal was to try to get more people to play World v World, then it may have worked for some people, but it didn't really work for me. All I did each week was kill 5 Doliacs, and then I left the game type completely. I figured that most people either like World v World and play it a bunch, or you just don't. And the last thing on that short list are the special leveling items, and I've played quite a lot in the past month and a bit and have yet to even have one of them drop, whereas my friend Wingy on the other hand has had dozens of them drop on stream over and over again while we've done fractals and all sorts of stuff. There must be something wrong with the drop systems I think, because none of us really need them on a level 80s, and it's not nearly as fun to have them drop on those characters and then have to bank them and give them to alts. There's something going wrong there. Now then, let's talk about the real deal here, the new player experience. You all know my first impressions and I basically just rolled my eyes and made fun of it all. Since then I wanted to be fair about it, so I wanted to give the system a thorough look through and really analyse if the changes were as bad as they initially looked. So I made a mesmer and I levelled it on my stream from level 2 to 37. All of this footage of me levelling this character and experiencing the new systems is available to watch right now on this YouTube channel. The videos are incredibly long and they show everything that I did. They're extensive, they're 100%, everything's there. If you're really interested in hearing my initial reactions and all this stuff firsthand, then that evidence is right there, and I'll put a link or something to the playlist in the description of this video so that you can find them. Although I wouldn't advise sitting down and trying to watch all of it, just perhaps skipping through to select parts. So I'm going to break this stuff down into chunks based on levels and my experiences going through those chunks of levels. I have a lot of problems with how the new player experience handles things, or handled things. Some of those problems are from a veteran viewpoint, and some of them are from an actual new player viewpoint. A lot of these thoughts are going to be in a jumbled order with very few segues. It's going to be a very much a stream of consciousness, although I'm reading from a script right now if you're interested. And if you want a text version of these notes, I will provide a pastebin link to those in the description as well. So on launch, when I first played the game, I leveled through general map completion, and this is exactly how I repeated my leveling during these streams and through the new player experience. I did, as far as I can tell, nothing particularly differently this time around, and in fact I followed the compass thing that they'd added a lot, because this thing had been added for a reason. One of the main complaints that new players have is that they don't really know what to do or where to go, so this compass is the direct response to those complaints, and you'd think that the compass would be the solution, and for the most part it is. It does a decent job at directing you to appropriate places and keeping you busy. However, I still see a lot of people in-game, on Reddit, on forums and all sorts, asking where to go and what to do still, so it hasn't entirely fixed things. I'm sure it has helped a lot of people, but some people don't seem to see it as that useful. Worse still is that it's still on October... When am I recording this? October the 16th I'm recording this script. It still directs me to places that I shouldn't be. Whenever I go to the bank in Holbrack, it tells me to go to Dredgehaunt Cliffs, which is a level 50 zone. That's been happening all the way since level 2, all the way up to level 37. Alright, so I set out of the gate at level 2 and began following the compass. Initially the speed of unlocking things was very slow, and I was unhappy with not having access to my skills nearly as quickly as I used to get them. Those are weapon skills, utility skills, basically every kind of skill. The first few levels do come much more quickly to compensate, but it didn't feel the same. What I can say though is that a new player trying this for the first time would not have any previous reference to compare it to, therefore I'm sure it would feel just fine to them, and this is just my bias going through in how it feels now. However, we simply can't just ignore the fact that these changes also affect us as veteran players, so you have to take my opinion as still valid, because even though we have access to level up scrolls and tomes of knowledge and things like that, maybe we actually enjoyed the previous leveling systems and liked making alts and going through that, and now this new system has sort of changed it, maybe ruined it. Either way, it's still a valid complaint. I severely missed having access to weapon swapping. The wait for that feature was incredibly painful, perhaps mostly because I was playing a mesmer and needed access to more options in combat, but I desperately wanted it. The same could be said for the F1 to F4 skills, the shatters. They unlock so late that I just never had any options available, and at level 15 I only had access to 2 of my shatter skills. True, you could just swap weapons out of combat to adapt to each situation, sure, but with the way that you unlock new skills at specific levels, instead of through weapon use, equipping a new weapon for the first time might suddenly give you 5 new skills all at once, and if they were trying to reduce the confusion that new players had while equipping new weapons, I'm not sure that this change exactly worked out. It's kind of counterintuitive. Obtaining the weapon skills through kills with that weapon allows players to learn what that particular weapon does, instead of just getting 5 new skills all at once dumped on them and then trying to have to learn the entire weapon set. Underwater skill unlocks were so incredibly dragged out that I genuinely hated having to go into any water at all, and normally I wouldn't mind it, but this time it was just terrible. I get the feeling that underwater combat is something they're sort of pushing into a corner and trying to ignore more and more, and I think that underwater combat needs improving, not scrapping. They touted it as a huge feature at launch, and it's just become this joke. The joke of the game is that underwater is just awful. And I don't believe that that is a fair thing to say, because it could be great, it just needs some work. At level 13 I unlocked my first utility, and that felt good, and it allowed me a bit of freedom that I so desperately wanted at the time. They even give you a free condition removal skill as well, which I assume carries over through every profession, which seems quite well timed because you start encountering conditions at that sort of a level. You don't have many skill points this time because you haven't been able to trigger your own skill points until level 13, which I think is a bit of a strange change, but you could still help other people do them and gain the skill point anyway, but it seems kind of awkward. When I did unlock new map completion objectives like vistas, points of interest and skill points, I'd be forced, if I wanted the map completion, to backtrack to go and get them from previous areas. And I don't think that they should outright hide them on the map, but keep the reminder pop-ups when you hit those levels. I just don't like having to backtrack through those zones all the time to get a new vista in a cave that I missed. I knew it was there, but I just didn't know exactly where it was. And another problem with backtracking is that I saw the same rampaging Minotaur event maybe 8 times, which makes the world feel less alive and more like a scripted sort of thing. It removes that bit of immersion. Along with removing conditions from a lot of early areas, they also removed a lot of bundle items from early areas, but oddly enough they kept transformations for some reason, which is arguably more difficult of a concept to figure out. However, they also dumbed down those early transformations as well, so the Snow Leopard Shrine is now harder to finish, because you no longer have access to the leap skill, and you're rooted in place when you attack. Speaking of hearts, I felt like the scaling on some hearts had been messed with as well. Some hearts feel a lot slower, you get less progress for doing things, and you have to repeatedly do the same thing so many times, whereas others fly past at light speed, which is good. I kind of enjoyed that actually. However, they do feel like they give a lot more XP as well for completing them now, which is muchly greatly appreciated, so that's a good change. I wasn't keen on unlocking the personal story in chunks. I prefer to split up my exploring with a lot more personal story steps here and there, just intertwined in between to break up the constant grind through map completion. But I felt much more like I just wanted to do the story for the XP boost this time around, instead of just breaking it up. There were 2 awesome things that did come from the new player experience update, and I realised that these things were there very, very quickly. Both of these things are to do with reward structures. Leveling now rewards you with items, and the personal story also does the same. Now, while you used to get stuff for finishing story steps anyway, now the items that you get, the bags, the skins, they all feel much better, more unique, more interesting. They're a great improvement overall. For levels, it feels the same. I really liked getting new items given to me at certain points. The stat choices on them were usually very good, the rune and sigil choices on the weapons and armour were also very good, and the skins on them were usually quite interesting, which is also very good. And one last miscellaneous thing to mention at these early levels is that all the merchants in the low level areas seem to only sell 4-slot bags. No salvage kits, no tools, none of that stuff. They all seem to have been removed. All of the rest of the merchandise is just gone, and I'm not quite sure why. It seems quite strange. In fact, it removes the convenience of having access to gathering tools so frequently. Anyway, to sum up those early levels, the most important levels to begin with, because those are the ones that get players interested to begin with, levels seem to go by quite quickly before level 10, but I noticed that it slowed down drastically, either due to actual systems in place or due to having fewer skills to play with, including the lack of weapon swap making it feel slower. Leveling does feel smoother, however. I had a lot of events to do and was never underleveled for an area, because the compass feels just fine if you do exactly what it tells you to do. However, the moment that you go somewhere it doesn't want you to be, it freaks out and tells you to do dumb stuff, like for example going to Dredgehorn Cliffs. So overall, for levels 1 to 15, it's quite good. I can see you unlock a lot of stuff, and it could keep people quite interested. I am unable to say whether it would have kept me interested or not, because, you know, I was already interested in the game to begin with. There are some good changes, but they're mostly underwhelming for me. My impression of leveling at low levels is that, while it isn't suddenly the worst thing in the world, I think it definitely is a worse system than before in my opinion, due to the restrictions. However, I can definitely see a new player feeling that sense of progression and unlocking things would probably feel quite good to them. In the next stream I got from levels 14 to 21, and I spent that time still in starter areas, and I played with my friend Lil, which could have changed my opinion also. There really weren't many observations that I could make during this one. Overall it was starting to drag on slightly after level 15, and keep in mind that when I streamed and played through these levels all the way to level 30, things were a little different back then, and the balance has since been changed. If you were to check the wiki right now, you'll see that the current balance looks a lot different and looks a lot better than the build that I had to play through. Remember that my opinions are still valid because they changed these systems because of these sorts of opinions. And if you want the wiki link, I'll put that in the description to the level rewards so you can go and check those out. One example of this is not having access to my utility slots for so long, which I've complained about previously, and it really was quite a drag. Yet, at that same point, I had so many skill points to play with. A side effect of having so many skill points meant that I wanted to unlock a bunch of skills, so I did that, and I wanted to be able to use more of these unlocked skills more of the time. However, you could only equip one at that level, and the thing is, you either need prior knowledge of those areas and enemies to be able to plan ahead and take more useful skills, or you need to stop what you're doing and reassign your skills just to make sure you know you're better prepared during that time. You don't need condition removal all the time, so you could generally be using something more fun in that slot in areas where you don't need condition removal, and I found that that sort of thing happened a lot and I had to keep stopping and changing my slots, whereas if I had 2 slots unlocked, which you would do now, you'd be able to just be better prepared all the time and you would have more freedom of choice. Speaking of freedom of choice, weapon swapping was a major relief to unlock, and it took a lot of needlessly complicated decisions out of my control and allowed for that freedom that I've been used to for the previous 2 years. Levels did slow down quite dramatically, and I noticed that due to the awkward scaling systems that are now in place. And while this didn't affect me much during these levels, it almost drove me mental between levels 20 and 30, and I'll talk about that in a few more minutes. And due to these suddenly slower level gains, I was aching for more story missions to gain levels from. I didn't like that I was so incentivized to do them in chunks as soon as I unlocked them, because I wanted more breaks from simply doing map completion, as I said earlier. And the final thing that I really noticed during these levels was the lack of traits. This is where it started to really hit me. I never did level a character since the April feature pack, so this was my first experience of having no traits at these levels, and it was underwhelming and disappointing. The next stream that I did got me from levels 21 to 26. Only 5 levels seems quite small, and there's a reason for that. As I said before, the way that ANET balanced the scaling is quite baffling to me. The original intent was to make it feel like when you gain these levels that give you these bunch of stats, that you feel more powerful and engaged, and that you earn something basically. However, in reality what this means is that at the levels in between these stat boosts, you gain what I like to call stat slumps. These big chunks of stats have to come from somewhere, otherwise the balance will be off, and that somewhere is where these stat slumps happen. They've taken stats away from us to give them us at different levels. In short, it means that you sacrifice a lot to occasionally feel like a badass. You feel like a weak, useless idiot, and I started to think that I was playing my character completely wrong when I was taking so long to kill things, which isn't what you want your players to feel like. It felt terrible, and was the reason that it took me so long to get so few levels. And this trend continued all the way to level 30, and at some point a red post went up on the forums with patch notes that, quote, fixed a bug that increased the time needed to progress from level 20 to level 30. And I'm very cynical if you hadn't noticed, and I'm not sure if I believe that the old system was a bug. I believe it got changed directly in response to complaints and labelled as a bug as damage control. And that's quite an accusation, and I don't blame the devs before anyone says I do. I'm wondering what the higher-ups had to do with this. My theory as to why they sped up these levels is quite simple, though there's nothing special there. At level 1 to 9 you have all the learning stages, at level 10 to 19 you have the story introduction and the fleshing out of all those previous mechanics. At level 20 to 29 you get nothing much, it's just more of the standard gameplay, and then suddenly at level 30 you get traits and dungeons and a whole lot of stuff that unlocks to go for, and you'll be kept busy and incentivized at that point. So they wanted to fast track up to level 30 a little bit more, and that's just how I see it. I don't think it's a bad way of going about it. The sooner I get to traits, the better, I think. I'm just a bit sour that they labelled it as a bug, because I just don't believe that it was. I believe it was intentional, and like I said, it was just damage control when they said it's a bug. Anyway, apart from all that, those levels were very uneventful. I was also left wondering at some point where those special levelling weapon drops were, since I still hadn't seen any. And still haven't at level 37. Levels 26 to 32 were much more of the same. I instantly noticed the EXP scaling fix though and got to level 30 much more quickly than I would have done before that fix. And once I was level 30, I geared up from the trading post, I bought a full set of blue level 30 gear including jewellery, and I noticed how expensive it was. I guess this is due to linen prices and all that stuff, but while it was expensive, I could easily afford it from selling all of my stuff that I'd gained so far. Gear does not seem out of reach to an average player, which is pretty well balanced if you ask me right now. With that new gear, I took a couple of friends and a few pugs from the stream and things like that through Ascalon Catacombs story mode, and we destroyed it. It was easy. It's a ton easier than what it was like at launch, and it made me feel pretty good about things. The game felt fun again for that dungeon run, and it was a new experience when compared with how the rest of the game had been played up until this point. That 5-man party stuff was great. The rewards were also good, and I enjoyed the entire thing. The only issue that I could identify would be with the community, and this is something that can't really be fixed that well. It's generally quite hard to find a group that will let you into those dungeons at the minimum required level. And you can't really blame people because it's not that hard to get to level 80 these days. At some point during that dungeon run of Ascalon Catacombs, a patch hit, and this was a pretty substantial set of changes, and I have some things to talk about in regards to those things. The main thing that this patch changed was the levels at which you unlock new skills. Previously it would take until level 40 to unlock all of your Profession F skills, utilities and your elite skill. This patch made it so that you unlock all of your ability slots apart from your elite at level 19, and then your elite comes at level 31, only one level later than previous before this feature pack. This was a massive change, and I'd been complaining for a long time about how restricted the gameplay felt up until this point where this change hit. I was instantly much happier about how the gating felt at low levels. Compacting those unlocks and always having good stuff to open up every level or two makes it much more interesting and entertaining, and much easier to play the game. Having access to all of my utilities now meant I was much more likely to be prepared for stuff like conditions or stuns or boons or whatever in those new areas to come. Again though, I took issue with how ArenaNet handled these changes. Colin Johansson made a post on the forums shortly after the feature pack launched to address the community. I'm showing this on screen so that you can read it, and there's a link to the post in the description of this video as well. The basic gist of it though seems to me like it's more damage control, and I believe that wholeheartedly due to the way that things are worded in the post, and due to the fact that it was Colin himself that had to make it. We've seen the devs being accused of not being in touch with the players much, and the outcry for Colin to always be the guy to resolve these kinds of issues is quite common. He gets called out on Reddit quite a lot, and I'm sure he's in a difficult position when that sort of things happens, and I feel sorry for him in that position. So for him to be the one to put these points forward meant that it was seen as a very serious issue, because he normally doesn't. Now while I don't blame Colin for that position that he's in here, I do blame the higher-ups, the marketing guys, those kind of dudes. I've heard so many stories from people in the industries, from friends who have previously worked in the industry and all that sort of stuff, that the marketing guys, the CEOs, and those sort of super executive guys can overrule decisions by devs. They can pretty much get the final say in a lot of things that they shouldn't get a say in. And I feel like this may have had some part in how the new player experience changes came about. I feel almost like Colin was ordered to be the guy to post this stuff because people are more likely to listen to him and respect him. Although I'll never know for sure, and that this is just a guess, just stay aware that I'm not calling him out. I'm fairly sure that there must be some kind of higher up guy calling the shots here. However, I'd still like to analyse this post a little bit. In it, Colin says this: some systems and features not unlocking as intended for all characters on your account once your first character learns them, some systems being level gated that aren't intended to be, balance issues where certain levels appear to be very out of whack, etc. are all bugs. It seems to me that those were a lot of bugs to have gone into the live client. It just seems way too suspicious that all of these bugs are also present in the Chinese client. I feel like they pretty much ported their Chinese client over to the West, and due to the massive reaction against it, had to label these things as bugs. For me, there were just way too many of these bugs to have not been ironed out in QA. How could they possibly not have noticed how bad some of these systems felt? I don't know. Hence why I feel quite suspicious of it. Anyway, Colin also goes on to say that there are some things happening at the wrong levels. Things like utility skills and elites are intended to come at approximately the same time they used to in actual game time. We sped up leveling for levels 1 to 15 and had to slide these things back in levels to offset that pacing. They are not currently where we want them to be in the level up system. This was an oversight and will absolutely be fixed. I can appreciate that these changes were misjudged in development. I can totally understand that. I don't think that they were outright oversights though. As I said before, the level gates were changed to be much better during my own testing. I can appreciate that the feedback was taken and used very quickly, so that's a thumbs up from me. And finally Colin goes on to say that I want to add that a few things, hello traits, are things that can be improved for players who make multiple alts. We are aware of this, and though company policy prevents us from discussing what's in development, I can say we know Guild Wars 2 can be an even better game for people who love making alts in the long run. More info when it's ready, trademark. I'm pretty sick of the policy of not telling us anything anymore, and when it's ready is really quite overdone now. Can we please drop that joke? It's not good. It's not funny, it's not useful, we just want more transparency, and I know this is hard because of that company policy, but if we can work on that whole transparency thing, I'd be much happier about things. And so would the rest of the community. Regardless, the news that something is in the works about traits is good news. This is also my first experience of not having traits unlock the old way. What I found during my level 32 to level 37 stream, where I cleared Lornar's Pass, is that I really miss traits a lot. The whole point of having traits be spread around the world is that they incentivize exploration. In reality, they feel very slow and arduous to obtain. I had to clear Lornar's Pass 100% to gain access to my sword cooldown trait. One single trait. While doing so, I also accidentally unlocked a master trait, number 8 Blurred Inscriptions, by clearing the Windy Cave, which I can't even use until I hit level 60. Why? There's a lot of examples of this sort of thing, of weird balancing of where traits are and how you get them and stuff like that. My issue is that while they are out in the world and there is incentive to get them because they make your character feel more powerful, the whole thing is totally offset by the fact that you can also buy them with gold and skill points. It's a lot of effort to go and get a lot of these traits, 100%ing areas, going and doing event chains, going and doing complex puzzles like the Windy Cave, and you don't even know specifically which ones you want to use right away, so you have no idea what you want to go and do, so you could end up wasting a lot of time, or a lot of gold and skill points which are in short supply on a newer character, and not be very pleased with the result. I shouldn't have to look up a guide as to which traits I want to go and get before I've even explored and got them myself in-game. I don't want to look stuff up, I want to experience the game. Even having the option to buy these traits is counterintuitive to why they were even changed in the first place. They're supposed to encourage exploration, but in reality they encourage farming, because that's just easier. My hopes that they would have had unique challenges per class for each individual trait were also not realised, and that's incredibly disappointing. Alts are forced to either do the exact same things to unlock these traits over and over again, or just use currency. I'd prefer to go and lock them in the world by gameplay and all that sort of stuff, and exploration and challenges and things, not by doing the same stuff I've done before over and over again for the exact same reason. So that's about it. This was my huge stream of consciousness, and I don't even know how to structure all of that in any kind of better way than I just did that keeps all of that detail. So let me quickly summarise the pros and cons. This is going to forego a lot of detail, but you know, a lot of people are going to skip to the end just to hear the conclusions. So, pros. Item rewards for levels, good. Item rewards for story, good. Reminders and small tutorials for new players, good. Speed at which you now unlock things early, good. The feeling of progression is good. And the cons, gated content for veteran players or alts, not so good. People who used to enjoy leveling the old way are affected by this. Traits feeling so painful to obtain, bad. Underwater and down skill unlocks are awfully balanced, that's also bad. Early backtracking to finish maps is bad, but it's not such a big deal because it ends quite quickly, and early merchants not selling tools and things again comes into the same camp. They do simplify the game, and I can understand those, but they again did affect my initial experience. The compass not giving really new players enough direction. I have seen many complaints since this update that people still don't know where to go or what to do, which is hard to believe, but it happens, so maybe that needs some work. And finally, the terrible stat scaling that doesn't work as intended. Those slumps, those stat slumps are awful. They make the game drag, and no one wants to experience that. So in final summary, as bad as all this stuff initially felt, a lot of it has been changed and fixed over time, even as I was doing this stuff. Overall, the level rewards feel much nicer, and the gating feels much less restrictive, but still restrictive, than it was to begin with. Traits are still a massive problem, along with the gated down skills and horribly broken stat scaling. Hopefully these things will be addressed eventually, but who knows when. The thing is though, I feel like the initial negativity towards everything was completely warranted, despite all of this being fixed. Because even as I was streaming it all and playing through these systems, I was hating it until they fixed these things. It was terrible, and the only offset to that were these level rewards, which were the only thing keeping me going. If it wasn't for the huge reaction to the update, then we would still have these terrible systems today. We, as a community, made a difference, whether you realise it or not. We helped make these changes better, although I feel like some people reacted quite harshly, and that was never my intention. So, I had to get all of this stuff out as a giant conclusion video, and hopefully you can see where I'm coming from, and how difficult it is to analyse the effects of all of these changes, especially as they kept changing things over time, and especially because I'm a veteran player trying to see things as a new player again. I believe I've done a reasonable job, but it can never be as accurate as their supposed metrics are. But there you go. Thank you very much for watching this long video, and I will hopefully see you guys next time.